We very, very intentionally weave wellbeing and learning together so that wellbeing isn't this thing that happens over at the side. And it doesn't happen by default. It happens by design through the very essence of a good learning process.
Good day, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be able to have so many members of our educational team together in the same conversation this afternoon with surely one of the most important figures in the history of CIS, if I dare say so, Professor Lea Waters, whom we invited to Braemar Hill for the first time back in 2012-13 and really made an extraordinary impact on not just the life of the school at that moment, but the vision for CIS, which we've kept alive ever since. Beginning next August and continuing over the following 3 academic years, it will be an immense honor for us to work with Professor Lea Waters again and to build further on the beginning of that journey of positive education that we started now 8 years ago. I'm really interested to know how you would describe the general challenges to well-being that the pandemic has posed, and perhaps also more specific challenges that this experience has meant for younger people in our communities.
From a psychology perspective, I think the biggest thing that everyone has been through collectively is this experience of shock. In terms of the way shock manifests itself, it's feelings of confusion, it's feelings of disorientation, it's feelings of being constantly alert because we're not quite sure what's going to happen next. Alongside those symptoms of shock can be sort of teariness, sadness, and that feeling of depletion. So that absolute moment of exhaustion, we tend to say you're wired but tired. In terms of young people, I think that they have also gone through shock, obviously. What I've seen in the work that I've been doing with schools across the globe is a really deep sense of loneliness. The teenage brain it's largely just a social organ, and it's really designed to be connected all of the time. I think our kids have done a very good job in staying connected through digital and virtual means. It doesn't replace that interpersonal contact. It's hit young girls more so than young boys, that sense of loneliness. I would add to that grief. It's a psychological response to the loss of something. Our brains are really wired to have the perfect balance of routine and predictability so that we know that we're safe. And for a while, that got blown out of the water for all of us. But at the same time, the brain really craves novelty, particularly, again, a young brain needs that novelty because that's how a young brain learns and it forms all its neural networks. There's been new things that have happened in a young person's life, but not quite the novelty that they want. And I think what we're seeing is this sort of sense of restlessness in our sons and our daughters and our students at CIS.
So back in 2012, 2013, we had the immense privilege of working with you for the first time. So this is for the wider audience. Can you remind us of the work at that time which proved to be foundational for the vision, the educational vision, which we are still pursuing today?
We really took a very whole school approach, which we will do again in the Visible Wellbeing Partnership. But the whole school approach was about everyone in the school going through training with me. And the training was essentially around the science of positive psychology. 8 years ago, that was still a reasonably new science. And so CIS was really a thought-leading school in looking at how can we get ahead of the curve of this new field of science and integrate it into the culture of our school and into the learning environment of our school. The school appointed a positive education steering committee. You were a member of that committee, Brian, so was Tracy. And so we had committees in the secondary and the primary whose role was post the training. Then how do we start to sort of embed this and make it CIS's kind of very own tailored approach?
Connecting to that, Lea, we will be embarking on the second part of our journey with you soon to dive into the visible well-being framework that you have since developed since that time that we worked together for our, the next 3 academic years of implementation. So maybe you could share a little bit about what that framework looks like.
So I've published quite a lot on what I'm calling the SEARCH framework. The SEARCH framework is an acronym that stands for 6 pathways that we know if we build up capacity and skill sets in each of those 6 pathways, these are a formula that boost our mental health. So those 6 pathways are strengths, emotional management, attention and awareness, relationships, coping, and habits and goals. So that'll be kind of the core, I suppose, content. Where visible wellbeing is a sort of evolution of the work that I did with CIS back in 2012 is in terms of this very clear, structured framework around search, but then making sure that when we are training all of the staff, that we're also working with some of those change levers. So measurement was one, and we did measurement with CIS back then. We'll be doing measurement, we'll be doing coaching, we'll actually have a sort of change champion team who will be doing additional work with me and equipping staff with practices. And then finally what we've added is this process of setting visible wellbeing goals.
So I'm just going to paraphrase something that you've written. And I wonder how the visible wellbeing framework combines the science of wellbeing and the science of learning.
One of the traps that a school can fall into when they take this positive education approach is that there's sort of positive education over here, and then there's learning and academic curriculum over here. Mm-hmm. I guess what I was able to do was to see that we need to find ways of embedding wellbeing into the learning process itself. Where I work at the University of Melbourne, one of my colleagues is John Hattie, Professor John Hattie. As you know, over the last decade, he's really been doing a lot of work on visible learning and what it is that creates genuine learning in a student. So I really had him as a coach kind of saying, you need to do the same thing with wellbeing, so that a teacher in the front of the class who's implementing a wellbeing practice knows the impact. They know whether it's having an effect or not. So John's really big on setting learning goals and learning practices or techniques or strategies that map onto that learning goal, and then having success criteria. And we just mirror that process now with wellbeing. So we also have a wellbeing goal, we use some wellbeing activities, and we have success criteria so that we know if what we're doing is having an impact on the wellbeing of the students. And those wellbeing goals are based on the search pathway. So there's great flexibility for teachers to say, I'm really interested in cultivating strengths in my students, or I think this particular group right now needs coping. So my learning goal will be around that pathway of coping. So really interweaving wellbeing and learning as 2 kind of parts of the helix in the classroom. And then the third component that came into that, Christine, was me again having the good fortune of working with a couple of visible thinking schools coming out of Harvard and the cultures of thinking that make thinking more visible to assist learning. And again, we can do exactly the same thing with wellbeing, because wellbeing is this internal resource that we know is critical for learning. When a young person has low levels of wellbeing, they don't learn effectively. So the same logic, how do we create, instead of thinking routines, I call them visible wellbeing activities that take this internal phenomenon of a student's wellbeing and make it more visible for the teacher, so they can see who are the students who need a little bit of extra lifting up, who are the students who are doing well on wellbeing, so we can really extend them with learning. We can't work with wellbeing as a resource for learning until we can see it. And so visible wellbeing is about making it visible, and it's about linking it in with the learning process itself. And then it's about doing it intentionally by setting these goals and these practices and these success criteria which come from visible learning.
Can you talk a little bit about what the Visible Wellbeing Program will involve on the part of CIS and what we can hope to achieve over the course of this 3-year relationship that we're starting up with you, and then to how we're going to know that we're on the right path?
So the first year will be a lot of the behind the scenes work. I'll be working with you, Tracy, and I'll be working with Brian and the senior leadership team here. And then we're going to be measuring all of the students and staff on the levels of search. So we'll get a sense of the degree to which people know and are playing to their strengths, the degree to which people understand the importance of emotional management and so on. Then in the next 2 years after that, that's when I'll actually be back on campus. So what people can expect then is the whole school training. We'll have additional coaching for a smaller group of people who'll be those change champions. That's also when everyone gets the Visible Wellbeing Activities Manual. So you'll be getting the knowledge from me when I'm there to train, but you'll have the access to the practices and the processes in between.
I'm just curious what your thoughts are about the role that agency plays in well-being.
Agency, it's one of those kind of vital psychological ingredients for everything, not just well-being. So agency is a person's capacity to have influence over their actions and their life. And it involves things like, firstly, their intention, then it involves self-regulation, and self-reflection is self-awareness. When you take an approach like you guys have done, which is very much around moving the notion of well-being away from it being a curriculum to it being about culture, the culture of the school, who we are in the essence of our school, is that you get this lovely feedback loop. Because as a staff member, when you see students having high levels of well-being, bouncing back, coping, being adaptable, being resilient, knowing their strengths, striving forward, that's got to make you feel good as a staff member as well. So that actually feeds into your well-being. And I think one of the most meaningful pieces of feedback that I get is when a teacher or a staff member comes up to me and says, this has professionally rejuvenated me because I'm seeing it have this really positive impact on my students. And that's why I'm here at the end of the day. One of the things about the visible wellbeing approach is that it recognizes the important role of parents and families. And I will be doing some focus groups with some families in this 3-year partnership, and then we'll be running some parent evenings.
So what advice would you give our students for the summer months ahead as they prepare for not just the summer months, but of course the school year beyond that, recognizing that it may become fraught with disruption?
I think this summer vacation is different. And I think it's about creating a mindset of saying, how can I rest? How can I restore? Get ourselves back to a point of resilience so that we can continue to cope. The neuroscientists have found that when we pause, it kicks in the default network mode. And the default network mode is a key mode for integrating memory, for consolidating learning, and it gives us an opportunity to step back and have that reflection on, well, who am I and how do I want to handle this next round of uncertainty? For the adults, it's certainly about giving ourselves permission to rest and restore and recharge, absolutely. And so this is about intentionally putting wellbeing as a priority over the summer vacation to build up your mental health bank account, so that if there are further withdrawals, you're starting from a much higher basis than what you are right now. This is a real time to think intentionally about our strengths and what strengths we have to bring in as a community, as an individual, as a family, to navigate the challenges coming from a position of strength rather than weakness.
Lee, thank you very, very much for this wonderful conversation, which is so important to us all. It's one to which I'm sure many of us, including myself, will be returning again and again in the coming weeks. And it is also one which marks the opening of the path of visible well-being, on which we will be journeying with you as our guide over the course of the next 3 years. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Because this is the last community conversation of the year 2019-20, please allow me to extend to each and every member of the CIS community my very best wishes for a safe and peaceful and healthy summer. Take care and be well.